Greetings and welcome to episode 20 of Bible 180, 180 episodes between Genesis and Revelation, 15 minutes at a time. Today we end Genesis with the Joseph story in Genesis chapters 37 through 50. Now there's a ton of material, and I've chosen not to kind of delve deep into all these different parts of Joseph's life, but rather to give a good overview of Joseph in these chapters. Joseph ends the book of Genesis before we get to Exodus and Moses. It explains how the people of Israel, the tribes of Israel, all ended up in Egypt at the end of Genesis. That's why the Bible was written on 3 continents. Africa, in Egypt, and Europe and Asia, and how all of them ended up there. It is a story of Joseph. Joseph ends Genesis as a person who always does the right thing. Always does the right thing. And in the story of Joseph, in these chapters 37 through 50, there are 5 parts. In these 13 fascinating chapters of the Bible, Joseph goes from being a son to a slave, from a slave to a prisoner, from a prisoner to a ruler, and from a ruler to the patriarch of all of Egypt. So very interesting. Jacob, his name was changed to Israel. He had 12 sons. Joseph was the second to the youngest son. He was the 11th son. Genesis 37 reads in this way: Jacob settled in the land where his father had lived as an alien, the land of Canaan, that would once again become the promised land that God sends Moses to. This is a story of the family of Joseph. Joseph, being 17 years old, was shepherding the flock with his brothers. He was a helper to the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Now Israel, Jacob, loved Joseph more than any of his other children because he was the son of his old age, and because he made a long robe with sleeves, a multicolored dream coat. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all of his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully with him. So what you need to know that Joseph grew up in a very dysfunctional family home. His biological mother was dead, and he's living with 3 stepmoms all under the same roof. He's got 1 younger brother and 10 older half-brothers, and there's a whole lot of rivalry because Joseph's father, Jacob, or Israel, loves him the most, and all of his brothers knew it. Israel gave Joseph an ornate coat, a coat of many colors, we say, and the coat wasn't just a coat. It was a statement. By giving Joseph this coat, Israel was saying to his sons, listen, let there be no doubt. This son is my favorite. I love him the most. This son is going to be the inheritor of my estate. And by the way, this is not just a coat of a working man, so that Joseph is not going to do a lot of work out in the field. He's not going to be doing manual labor. That's up to you, the rest of my least favored sons. Think about it. I mean, it's like having 12 sons, and on Christmas morning, you give 11 of them a coloring book from the dollar store and a box of used crayons, but you give the other son an iPhone 17 and an Apple Watch. It's like Joseph got to go to summer camp, and his brothers got summer jobs. Verse 3, Israel loved Joseph more than all of his other sons. It's probably more than all of them put together. Well, one night Joseph had a dream, a very vivid dream, and the problem is that he shared that dream with his brothers. It's like telling his brothers, about the sun and moon bowing down to him and his sheaves bowing down to him. It was like telling his brothers, Nini, I'm going to one day inherit the entire family farm. It was the wrong idea shared with the wrong people at the wrong time. And his brothers hated him even more. They said, what kind of dream is this that you've had? Shall we bow down before you, you and your me and your brothers and mother bow down to the ground. So the brothers became jealous of him, but Israel just kind of kept all these things in his heart. He didn't say much. He was kind of a dysfunctional dad. And here's something to watch for as the story continues. Even though Joseph's brothers did horrible things to him that we'll hear about in a moment, it's actually through the mistreatment of the brothers that comes the greatest lesson of Joseph's life. What's interesting is that the brothers are going to be the ones used by God to accomplish Joseph's dream. And we get the insight early on in the Bible, in these chapters, that God sometimes works that way. God can sometimes take the worst things in our lives and turn them around and use them for God's good and God's purpose. Sometimes it's only when we hit bottom sometimes that things turn around in sometimes important and amazing ways. So watch for that. Because at the end of Joseph's stories, all of the bad stuff that happened to Joseph come to the conclusion that what you meant for evil, God meant for good. Joseph says that to his brothers in Genesis chapter 50. Huge lesson. What you meant for evil, God used for good. It's an important early biblical lesson. So the story continues. While the brothers are keeping their sheep a long way from home, Joseph comes to visit them. They capture him, they throw him in a pit. Eventually, they sell him to a passing group of Midianites who are on their way to Egypt. The brothers kill a goat, and they take Joseph's multicolored dream coat and dip it in the blood of the goat, and go to their father Israel and tell him that they found the robe, and something terrible must have happened to Joseph. Father Jacob recognizes the coat and realizes that he'll go to the grave mourning the death of his son, who he thinks was killed by a wild animal. So Joseph is 17 years old. He's sold to the Midianites, and they bring him and give him to and sell him to an Egyptian official named Potiphar. Okay, that happens in chapter 39. So Joseph starts working for Potiphar in Egypt, and all goes well because Joseph always does the right thing. God blesses Joseph's diligence, and he starts working through the ranks of Potiphar's household and eventually becomes the manager of his household. Joseph gets to the top of his game in Potiphar's household, and the problem is that Potiphar's wife started noticing this young buck of a guy, and she makes a pass at him. Joseph refuses her, and then he says, "How can I commit this great sin against God?" Potiphar's wife then goes to her husband and said, "Joseph made a pass at me. You better throw him in jail." So Potiphar is angry. He threw him in jail, threw him in prison. But even in prison, Joseph holds on to his dream. He soon rises to the top and becomes the most trusted inmate in jail with leadership responsibilities. In the next chapter, chapter 40, two of the king's men who were also in jail with him, a cupbearer and a baker, are also imprisoned, and they have dreams. And they don't know who can interpret the dreams. Joseph says, "Hey, I'm pretty good at interpreting dreams." Joseph tells them that in 3 days the cupbearer will be released and assigned to the previous job that he had. But sorry for you, baker, you're going to be hanged. So before the cupbearer a cupbearer is a guy who drinks the wine and eats the food before the king to make sure it's not poisoned. So it's a very trusted position. And Joseph says, "Hey, before you taste the king's food, say, hey, there's this guy in prison, Joseph. He's a pretty good guy. Can you let him out?" But during the 13 years of that passes for Joseph in Egypt, he's 30 years old, and the cupbearer doesn't say a thing. Then in chapter 41, Chapter 41, Pharaoh. The Pharaoh himself has a dream and nobody can interpret it. All of a sudden, the cupbearer has a V8 moment. Oh, I forgot about Joseph. So Pharaoh calls for Joseph to come to the palace to interpret the dream of 7 fat cows coming out of the river, followed by 7 very lean cows coming out of the river. Lean, skinny cows. Fat cows followed by skinny cows. Joseph says, God's given me the ability to interpret dreams. And Joseph says to the Pharaoh, what this means is that you're going to have 7 years of plentiful harvest followed by 7 years of famine. So that's what's meant by the 7 fat cows and then the 7 skinny cows. He says, Pharaoh, what you ought to do is store up the grain during the years of plenty so that in the years of famine you'll have plenty of food to eat and maybe even sell some and make some money. So Pharaoh thinks, wow, that's a pretty good idea. I ought to have Joseph head up the government food program to store the food and distribute it. And Joseph is eventually promoted and given authority to do what he wants to in Egypt, second only to Pharaoh himself. Now, during the 7 years of plenty, Joseph supervises storing up 20% of the grain every year in great big harvest store grain silos, and a high-ranking Egyptian official gives Joseph one of his daughters to marry. Joseph has 2 sons with the Egyptian wife, and during that time in Egypt, Joseph becomes fully acclimated to being an Egyptian in the way he dressed. He shaved his hair. He didn't have a beard. He walked like an Egyptian, like the song goes. So the 7 bumper year crops pass and the 7 years of famine begin. The famine struck over the entire world at that time, and Jacob, remember Jacob, Israel, back in Canaan with his 11 sons and their families, they're also affected. They hear that there's food down in Egypt, so Joseph's 11 brothers come down to Egypt to buy some food. They come before Joseph, the food distributor now. Unfortunately, Joseph looks like an Egyptian, so they don't even recognize him. And Joseph thinks to himself, of course, these are the hard-hearted men, brothers who sold me into captivity. Joseph also knows that Jacob had not come to rescue him or search for him. He didn't want much to do with his dad either. Then the only one that Joseph cares about really is Benjamin, his younger brother, his mother's son. After finding out that about the brothers and their family, Joseph does get them food. Benjamin wasn't with them at the time, but he said, bring Benjamin the next time to make sure. And to make sure that Benjamin comes back with them the next time, he keeps Simeon as a slave until they return. So when all of their food ran out, the brothers knew that they're not going to survive unless they go to Egypt again and take Benjamin again with them. Father Jacob said, no, don't. Israel, Jacob, said, don't take my remaining son of my beloved Rachel, but realizes that there's no other way. So he agrees to have Benjamin go with him. When the brothers arrive, Joseph sees Benjamin, tells the men to go back for more food provisions, but that Benjamin will live there with him in Egypt. At that moment, the brothers are asked to leave Benjamin in Egypt. And they show that they're different from 22 years ago. They beg for Benjamin's life. Judah volunteers to stay forever as a slave. Judah's a good brother, as long as they would let Benjamin go home. Judah said that their aged father would die if Benjamin doesn't come home with them. Joseph hears the men talking in Hebrew. He can understand their language. They blame themselves for what they did to Joseph 22 years before. Joseph now sees a different heart in his brothers than they were 20 years ago. Joseph weeps at their confession. He knows that he has the power to save them. And in a tearful scene and kissing, hugging, and rejoicing, Joseph says, I am Joseph, your brother. The brothers are amazed that Joseph arose from being thrown in a pit to the second most powerful people in all of Egypt. Joseph forgives them because he knows the leading and guiding of God had been in the entire story and all that happened to him. So the brothers return to Canaan with plenty of food and carts and wagons, and they bring their whole family system down to Egypt. Even Jacob, now called Israel, probably about 130 people, are now in Egypt. Joseph and his brothers, their father Israel, the 130 of them are in Egypt, living in their own land in harmony with the Egyptians. For 54 more years, Joseph grew, and when he knew he was about to die, in the last paragraph of Genesis, Joseph calls his brothers and his family together and says, I need to bless you, and he passes on the blessing. Or when Israel does that, and when Joseph says, you brothers, what you meant for evil, God used for good. The story of Joseph is an amazing, wonderful story that shows how God works in mysterious ways through imperfect, sinful people to oftentimes accomplish a greater good. Joseph's story is a perfect illustration that all things can work for God if we just hang in there with God, if we trust God. God can turn curses into blessing, misfortune into prosperity, and make all things, even sinful, even evil things, work together for the good of those who love God. Our God is an awesome, powerful, loving, creating God. So when tough times come up in your life, remember the story of Jacob. Remember, Joseph always did the right thing. Genesis ends with all the tribes of Israel down in Egypt. That will be a formational remembrance when we get into the book of Exodus. I look forward to being with you for the next episode, and until then, just do whatever you can to make it a great day. See you again soon. Bye-bye.